America, the global Khalistan project seems to have been amped up in the last few months. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. In the last few hours have come confirmed reports that there has been a second attack on the Indian consulate in San Francisco. The fire, yes, it was a fire, can you believe it, was doused and there were no injuries. But the symbolism of this arson is lost on nobody. And it comes on the heels of what's been unfolding in Canada almost on a regular basis, where posters have been released by Khalistani groups literally calling for the killing of Indian diplomats who are posted there. All of this renewed violence and vandalism and assault on the states of India's nationhood have taken place after designated terrorist Harjeet Singh Nijjar was killed earlier in the month of June. India has taken this up strongly once again, in particular with Canada, where the politics itself of the the more liberal, so-called liberal politicians there actually involves cassetting and protecting many of these Khalistani extremists. But is this demarche enough? How many times are we going to actually see this sort of open, brazen impunity by Khalistani terrorists, extremists, and pro-Khalistan groups? How do we understand this amped up activity in the global Khalistan project, and how should India respond? In particular with Canada, is it time to downgrade diplomatic relations? Let's introduce our guests on the program today as we look at this unprecedented twin attacks taking place both in Canada and the United States of America. Joining us is Dr. Ayesha Ray. She's an American-based political scientist and author. It's good to see you, Ayesha, after a long time. Also welcoming to the program, to the Mojo Story for the very first time. Very pleased to welcome Puneet Sahani, the colors of the flag there resplendent in his turban. Welcome to the program. You're an expert, of course, on Khalistan terrorism. Good to see you. Also joining us from Canada today, one of the foremost world experts on the global Khalistan project, Terry Lewinsky. He's a senior journalist and author, in fact, with a book out that's called Blood for Blood, looking particularly at the global Khalistan project. Welcome back, Terry. And also joining us is veteran Indian diplomat, Dileep Sinha. It's good to see all of you. And let me actually start with you, Terry. From an Indian perspective, this has gone on long enough. The Canadian High Commissioner has been summoned over the posters that openly call for the killing of Indian diplomats. The Indian diplomats are being held responsible for the killing of designated terrorist Nijjar. But this is not the first time. Canadian politics actually protect these Khalistani elements. From where you are, how do you see what's happening?
Terry. I think it's part of a long and sad history. I mean, don't get me started. You go back all the way to 1984, and I can remember talking to a Canadian High Commissioner in New Delhi, who was High Commissioner at that time, called in constantly every week by Rajiv Gandhi's government after the assassination of Indira Gandhi to be told, what is Canada doing? You're letting these people run rampant. There's been people invading the Indian consulate in Toronto, shooting the place up, and then they get away and they're not even arrested. Nothing happens to them. What's going on? Well, this could just be an inflection point, but I get the sense that Indians have certainly had enough, and a lot of Canadians have certainly had enough of this sort of soft peddling Khalistani provocations. Now we've got this sort of the Khalistan movement has morphed into a kind of old-time religion where you've got to believe the talking points, you've got to believe what the leader says, no matter how badly it fits with the facts. And what we're talking about now, of course, is the article of faith is that India did it. Whatever bad happens, India did it. And that means India must have assassinated Mr. Nijjar, prominent figure in the Khalistan movement and in Seeks for Justice, which is running a referendum campaign, as you well know. So they're all saying that this must be the case, blame India. The problem that they're facing, and this is where things are going to change, I believe, is that there is accumulating evidence that this was not some sort of geopolitical hit launched by the Modi government to eliminate Khalistanis overseas. Rather, it sounds like it could have been a squalid, sordid little local gangland tit-for-tat settling of accounts, a revenge killing. This isn't very pretty. This isn't so grandiose as the idea that they were cruelly cut down while riding some white horse to lead their people to a new nation. They're very agitated.
Let me jump in and ask you a quick second question before I open it up. You mentioned Indira Gandhi. Recently, a kind of tableau procession was taken out where the assassins of Indira Gandhi, we have those pictures, were actually celebrated. So, there was sort of this assassination that was recreated, and the assassins were celebrated. I mean, which proud nation is going to there? You can see those pictures, Terry. So look at these images. Now, my direct question to you is this: who is protecting these groups, these men, these extremists? Who is protecting them?
They're being protected by all the Canadian political parties. People say, oh, they blame the Trudeau Liberal government. Okay, fine with me, except that, please notice that all the parties, they don't criticize each other. This is why it perpetuates. This is why it goes on and on and on, decade after decade, because no party criticizes the other party for playing footsie with and courting the Khalistani vote. And play vote by vote, because they all do the same thing. I can't criticize you if I'm doing the same thing. And so that's why it goes on and on and on. And so far, nobody's kind of broken out of that pattern and said, okay, we're going to be different. We've had enough. We're not going to take this. We're going to make it clear publicly, explicitly. When these things happen, we're going to stand up and say, we are not going to stand for this. So far, haven't exactly heard that from the Canadian government in the case of these appalling posters painting a target on the backs of Indian diplomats, not just in Canada, by the way, but also in the United States and in Australia. They've got their high commissioners and their consul generals also on posters called killers. So we're not done with this, but I feel that at the end of it, there is going to be a change, and you'll find people saying, I can't apologize for this anymore. I've had it.
Well, as you mentioned, this has been going on from the time that Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, and you made a big statement. Every single political party in Canada is soft pedaling on the Khalistan question. Before I come to Dileep Sen, I just want to play out what Jaishankar, Indian Foreign Minister, said. The point is making rhetorical intervention, is the demarche enough? Doesn't something more need to be done? Listen in to Foreign Minister Jaishankar.
पोस्टर्स कनाडा में जगह जगह चिपकाए हैं जिसमें इंडियन डिप्लोमेट्स के यहाँ पे फोटो भी लगाया है, नाम वगैरह। देखिए इस पे मैं इतना ही कहूँगा, और मैं पहले भी कह चुका हूँ कि हम जो हमारे जो पार्टनर देश जो हैं, जैसे कनाडा है, अमेरिका है, यूके है, ऑस्ट्रेलिया है, जहाँ कभी कभी खालिस्तानी एक्टिविटीज होती हैं, हमने उनको रिक्वेस्ट की है कि वो उनको खालिस्तानियों को स्पेस न दें, क्योंकि उनकी सोच जो है ये रेडिकल एक्सट्रीमिस्ट विचारधारा जो है वो ना हमारे लिए अच्छा है, ना उनके लिए है, ना हमारे रिश्तों के लिए। तो ये जो पोस्टर का विषय ये हम जरूर उन सरकारों से उठाएंगे। हो सकता है कि हम अभी तक, क्योंकि ये कल परसों ही निकला था, हो सकता है कि अभी तक हो भी।
The Canadian High Commissioner, Ambassador Sinha, has been summoned. But, this seems like a kind of, it seems like more of the same in terms of what we're seeing happening in Canada and America, and also in terms of how we're responding. Does something more have to be done and said?
This is becoming a bit of a farce now, because you have countries like Canada and America. These are not banana republics. 3 months ago, there were attacks. That should have been a warning signal for the security people in these countries to protect soft targets like diplomatic missions. But now you have a repeat of an attack. Now, this is not a global problem. This is a problem in a clutch of countries in the West, not more than half a dozen. And this is not a problem, as Terry mentioned, that goes back to 1985 or 1984. It goes back to the late 1970s and early 80s, when a lot of people from India wanted to take advantage of the asylum laws in the West to migrate to the West. And that was the time when, in the late 70s and early 80s, when there were people who would go from Punjab to Germany and Canada and say that they were being persecuted in India, and then they would produce political leaders, political leaders who would go around these courts and say that, yes, these people were being persecuted in India, and therefore they were required to be given asylum in these countries. Now, the asylum laws in these countries are very peculiar. The countries do not distinguish between a democracy like India or a dictatorship like many other third world countries. They do not even get in touch with the government, although they have diplomatic relations with these countries. So let's say the Indian embassy in Germany or Canada would never be contacted to check out if these persons who were seeking asylum were actually being persecuted in India. They would just have a court case or a hearing with these asylum seekers. The result was that a number of these people who were either economic asylum seekers or who were being genuinely prosecuted in India for some crimes, they would then jump across. And this has happened with many other countries. It is only after 9/11 that the West has become slightly more serious about taking action against terror groups. And of course, in the previous case, let me give you a conspiracy theory that I have no evidence of. But we have had a very successful visit of our Prime Minister to the US. Most observers are saying that this is an inflection point in India-US relations. Now, an incident like this is bound to raise this outcry in India that the US government is unable to protect Indians and the US government can't be relied. There are a number of people in India who do not want relations to improve with the US. There are also people in Pakistan who don't want relations to improve. If you look at the international press, after PM Modi's visit, the highest amount of criticism of the improving India-US relations is for the Pakistani media. Now, this is an ideal opportunity for the ISI in Pakistan to get a few incidents to take place in Canada or the US, and thereby let there be an outcry in India against improving relations with these countries.
You know, it's not such a conspiracy theory because a research paper, Ambassador Sinha, by the Hudson Institute, actually shows you the linkages between pro-Khalistan groups and Pakistan's sort of ISI affiliates. And I'm sure Terry and Puneet have both looked at this. So let me bring in Puneet. Puneet, do you think what the ambassador is saying is a conspiracy theory, or is your mind also traveling in that direction? Because, you know, it's just like, it's obviously not a coincidence. United States, San Francisco, Canada, you know, there's been one thing after the other in the last few months.
So, Jai Ma Bharti Barkha, thank you very much. And there is some weight in what ambassador is saying. So, you know, but the thing is, and I just go to your point, you know, said this is happening for a few months. So, of course, you know, Pakistan wants to try and, you know, they want to look at pressure points. But sorry, this is not a few months. This madness actually came from this Kisan Andolan, you know, 2 years back, when Bhindranwale was, you know, normalized and the Overton window was expanded. And Barkha, you know, you yourself come from a Dutt family. You know, your community has incredible contributions to the Sikh faith. So I'm sure you have gone Gurdwara so many times. And did you ever see like a Bhindranwala portrait? Now forget Bhindranwala, there is a deep stew and everything. It's basically complete capture of it. So this is what they have done. And the second thing is, you know, beyond conspiracy, I am talking like a person on the ground. I just want to say, you know, try to imagine as flesh and blood humans. You're an average Indian in Canada. If they can paint a target on the back of the ambassador, like if you have a problem, what do? You contact your consulate or high commission, right, to help you out. If they can point a target on the high commissioner and you can't do anything, what you have terrified everybody here. And I just want to make another point. You know, you were making an issue of Mrs. Gandhi's tableau. You know, we were the one who actually raised a noise about it. You know, what is very fascinating is, Barkha, you see, when this Nijjar, you know, he is basically a low-life criminal if somebody looks at his record. When he died, all these Canadian MPs, they put out a tweet and statement about it. But when it was, Mrs. Gandhi tableau was taken out for kilometers, for 6 hours through the city of Toronto, for 6 hours. You see, nobody did. The only national politician who did it, his name is Pierre Poilievre. He is like a conservative. But even him, he did not have the guts to tweet it. Actually, what he had done is he had gone on his website and secretly written a comment there.
Are you saying that the Canadian politicians are scared of the Khalistanis?
So, of course, they are like a Muslim. You don't have to believe my word. So, for example, one MP, suddenly she woke up, you know, there was a noise. Her name is Anita Anand. She also comes from this Ontario. So, she has just posted one thing, you know, we disapprove of, you know, what they have done with the Indian diplomats. And you see under that the bullying she is receiving. Let
me just ask you one question, although it might take the debate into a different direction, and I don't want that to happen. But you spoke about the Kisan Andolan, the farmers' agitation, and you said that the Khalistani elements or the pro-Khalistan sympathizers were able to capture that element. I just want to say, or I just want to push you back a little bit on that and say, while they were definitely the Deep Sidhu characters, and that's why we saw what happened at the Red Fort happen, and I completely take that point. And while there were people who had photographs of Bhindranwale in their pockets, there were also army soldiers in there. There were also retired Jawans in there, right? So a lot of Sikhs are very offended when, and you're a Sikh, when everybody is seen through the prism of Khalistan.
Barkha, I am just talking about the outcomes. You may say some people had good intentions, some people had bad intentions. I'm talking as a Sikh, and you also believe in Gurdwara, and you grew up in Delhi. And 84 happened.
I say this as somebody who worships at only one place of worship, and that's a Gurdwara. I say this to somebody who worships at a Gurdwara.
So please let me see. So when 84 happened, the pogrom of Sikhs happened in Delhi. Did you ever see a Bhindranwala portrait in a Gurdwara? Till this Kisan Andolan happened. Now you say some people had good intentions or bad intentions. I'm interested in outcomes. And what I'm saying is, for Bhindranwala, Deep Sidhu, Gurdwaras have just become like this. There is no space for, believers like us who go for Gurbani. And this happened after Kisan Andolan. There is no if and but about it. Now you can say like some people had good intentions, bad intentions. I'm just saying this is the outcome and nobody can deny it.
Okay, the farmers' agitation is, as I said, it could take us into a different direction. This is the piecemeal response from the Canadian Foreign Minister. I want to bring in Aisha Ray. Aisha, one of the things you said on Twitter today is that you have often disagreed with the Modi government on one or the other thing, but you do not at all disagree with the position that has been taken on what's unfolding in Canada and the United States of America. And worse, there is a lack of understanding in large sections of the media there, in large sections of politicians who call themselves progressive there, though Terry is telling us in Canada it's across the spectrum. Go ahead, Aisha.
Thank you, Barkha, for having me. These turn of events are deeply troubling. And, as someone who does study terrorist groups or militant organizations and all of that, the one trend that I've seen, unfortunately, in Canadian domestic politics and its national security is that they have pretty soft gloves on when they deal with extremists. Just a couple of months back, when female ISIS returnees, for instance, were repatriated back to Canada, I think with the exception of one woman, none of the others were arrested. I mean, these were members of ISIS who had gone abroad and participated in pretty much the genocide of the Yazidis. And when they came back to Canada, nothing was done. And, they might have had something called a terrorism peace bond on them. But eventually, they were just let go, which I found deeply troubling, And so I feel like the Khalistan extremists, again, sort of, any sort of extremism is dealt with pretty soft gloves.
Why though? Why? The question, Aisha, is why?
That's a great question, and it's a mystery. Maybe Terry could highlight why that is the case. But I think that maybe, and I'm not a Canadian expert on Canadian politics, but it could be that their national security laws are different, or they tend to just respond to things like this differently. But a lot of, the problem is that, what we've seen in Canada, this poster, many will argue, oh, it's free speech, right? It's not free speech. This is hate speech. This is something that could get people killed. This is deeply dangerous. This is an attack on India. I mean, this is not something to be taken lightly. So it's really baffling to me that, and including this horrific tableau that we see. Of Indira Gandhi, just standing there, and how is all of this being allowed to happen, right? Because eventually there will come a time when somebody could actually get harmed, and I don't know what the response of the Trudeau government is going to be, and I think the Trudeau government needs to seriously pay attention to this growing threat, because this is not going to end right away.
Yeah, before I take that back to Terry, I want to read out a question from one of our Mojo members for Ambassador Sinha. If Canada cannot conform to the Vienna Convention, how about expelling a number of Canadian diplomats and approaching the International Court of Justice to raise Canadian disregard of the Vienna Convention? Ambassador Sinha, go ahead, take that question.
Yes, Canada has been quite a remarkable country. On a slightly different note, Canada was one country in climate change that actually walked out of the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol is one of the important protocols in the climate change negotiations, and it got away with it. There was no criticism of Canada for having de-ratified the Kyoto Convention, the Kyoto Protocol. So here you have a country that has done by a series of acts. Now, this tableau that you are showing, I mean, a person has a right to criticize India, criticize by all means, but display of weapons in a tableau, that is completely unacceptable. And here you have
do you believe some Canadian diplomats should be expelled by India?
Expelling is usually done at if it has been at the level of an ambassador, because you can't expel a junior diplomat for this. But we should certainly take it up very seriously with the Canadian government, and I think relations with Canada should be kept on a low keel for some time, because Canada just cannot get away with this kind of behavior. It is unacceptable for us. Now, whether we should expel the ambassador or not, or the High Commissioner, would be a very difficult decision to take, I'm sure, at this stage. But certainly we should take it up at a very, very strongly with the Canadian government. And if it does not take action against these groups, then we should take it up also internationally in the correct various forums. And if it doesn't do that either, then of course we might actually have to consider the ultimate step of taking some diplomatic step like expelling the ambassador.
I should say, in parallel, the SCO summit, I know, Ambassador Sinha, you're not a fan of it. You believe forums controlled by the Chinese and the Russians are forums that India shouldn't be in. But I'm just making the news point that the Prime Minister has spoken about terrorism in that virtual meet of the heads of state that have taken place. It's kind of ironic that all of this is happening. I want to bring in Terry with two questions. One, the theory that Ambassador Sinha puts forth on the links between a Pakistan affiliate and what you're seeing happening. Two, does this have something to do with the Prime Minister's America visit? And three, a question of my own, which is, and Aisha's question as well, is this all just about electoral politics, or is this, as Puneet says, also about fear now?
Well, on the first question, the role of Pakistan, of course, Pakistan has always been the essential additive to the Khalistan project from the start, going back to 1971 war, the creation of Bangladesh. They want revenge. They want a strategic buffer on their border with India. They want to cut off India's land access to Kashmir and the rest of it. I think you're familiar with all this. Secondly, on the question of, why does this happen in Canada? Why do we sit around with such a flabby, weak response? First, two things. The first is that Canadian federal elections do tend to turn on very few swing ridings in Toronto, in Ontario, and in British Columbia, which make all the difference. And those happen to be ridings with large populations from the Indian diaspora. And lastly, of course, many of your viewers will already know this, but we've got to mention this. I'm sorry. And that is that the Trudeau government currently ruling Canada depends for its survival upon a left-wing party, the NDP, which is led by Jagmeet Singh, who is a Khalistan sympathizer, who, when I asked him, when he won, the day after he won the leadership of his party, I asked him, will you denounce these obscene martyr posters glorifying the great Talvinder Parmar, the mastermind of the Air India bombing, Canada's biggest ever mass murder? Will you denounce these posters at the Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia? And he ducked the question 5 times in a row. He didn't want to go there, didn't want to. I mean, how hard can that be for a Democratic politician to condemn posters venerating, elevating to a sort of saintly status the worst mass murder in Canadian history? I think these facts are not irrelevant. They're well known, but they're not irrelevant as to why the response from Canada is what it is. I believe that it now needs to change, and that Indian politicians can contribute to that change very simply by getting tough and holding Canada's feet to the fire.
Effectively, you're saying a key Trudeau ally basically venerates Khalistani terrorists.
Well, I mean, look at his statements through time, even up to the present day. I mean, he says that interference, as though that has something to do with a gangland revenge killing in British Columbia. Oh, no, it implies that India did it, that he buys this theory that Indian hit squads are going out rubbing out Khalistanis. Nijjar wasn't even a particularly significant figure. There are lots of other people the Indians might have wanted to assassinate if that's what was the game that they were playing. So I think that where Indian politicians need to go now is stop banging the table and saying, we don't like this free speech. Well, you're not going to win on that. We're not going to abolish free speech. What you need to do is hold Canadian politicians' feet to the fire and say, oh, you want to come to a rising India and you want a piece of our market? You want a free trade agreement? Sorry, I'm busy that day. Unless you are going to be public and explicit in condemning these appalling activities, these posters, these rallies, this veneration of terrorists. You've got to cut that out. You've got to say so publicly, and then we might find a way to fit you into our schedule. Otherwise, sorry, I'm busy. We're not going to receive ministers from Canada who won't do that and say what needs to be said.
Yeah, I think that you are being so passionate, Puneet. Do we as a state need to be more passionate? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of anger being expressed behind the scenes. Diplomats aren't going to, sort of tell us what goes on behind closed doors. But what would you want? What would you seek from the government at this stage in terms of responding to Canada? And we haven't spoken about what's happening in San Francisco. You're in the United States of America. If you want to bring in the US as well. Puneet.
So, Barkha, I'm an empiricist. So it's like what worked. So when you say about, this was the only guy who actually saw terrorism as well and had a clear line was Captain Amrinder Singh, even though he was from Congress. I have nothing to do with BJP Congress. And in 2017, he said Canada should be taken to United States securities for, promoting terrorism. They should be, it's his statement. And what about fear? I'll just put a point, so Terry said, there are on the coast, there are two big, Vancouver and Toronto. I give you two things what happened, what they did, what these liberals do to patriotic anti-Khalistani Sikhs. So on the other side, Terry did the story, this Trudeau forced Harjeet Singh on a local deserving candidate. And the patriotic Sikhs, and all of them are Jat Sikhs, and you can read the story. Many of them are baptized Sikhs. They left the party in disgust that you are putting on top of us this Khalistani. And, their career was destroyed. And that Harjeet Singh had done stolen valor and again. Now you go the other side. I'm telling you, this is as recent as 2021. There was a report by the Canadian intelligence. Look, their CSIS, what you call intelligence bureau, or what you can say. They said, there is a risk of, this Khalistan extremism. And this under pressure from these Khalistanis, which work like a Muslim Brotherhood pressure group inside, they try to remove all references. And that guy, Ramesh Sangha, he's a Jat Sikh. He stood up in the parliament and he said, I am a Sikh myself. And, this is nothing against Sikhs. What they are saying is absolute nonsense. This is against Khalistan terrorism. And of course, we are against terrorism. The liberals, they kicked him out of the caucus. That guy was the MP of this Brampton area, which is this mini Punjab of Canada. He has now left politics and he runs this law practice. So forget about somebody speaking. They can destroy the career of the MP, member of parliament, who just says, okay, this Khalistan terrorism, and his career has been destroyed, not by his voter, has been destroyed by Justin Trudeau.
Let me take this to Aisha. Aisha, I also think that in large sections of Western media, for example, the way Khalistani sympathizer Amritpal Singh, who was on the run, he was somebody I personally tailed, and I think Puneet makes this point about the corrosion of Gurdwaras when he eventually gets taken into custody. It's after he does his little moment commemorating Bhindranwale, right? And the Western coverage of him was almost, in large sections of the Western media, romanticized, right? And it's annoying, it's grating. I routinely get targeted by the right wing in India as well as by the left wing, because I decide my position on issues. And on this issue, I believed that there was no romanticization that was legitimate. This man was trying to set up an armed militia. He released pictures of himself. He modeled himself on Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. But if you saw how the sort of progressive media covered him, that's not necessarily what came across. The focus was almost more on internet shutdowns and on what this man stood for. Is that part of the problem in the way this issue is being understood in Western nations?
To some extent, I think yes. The answer would be yes, but I would be careful not to take it too far. You know what I mean? Remember the time, of course, when we did see that ridiculous advertisement on in New York's Times Square with Amritpal Singh, and it was just like, wait, what is going on here? But again, in one of the issues here is that there are certain elements, in the US, in Canada, in Western countries who will use free speech as just a method to deploy and sort of promote their propaganda. And it's sort of a veneer, right? They use the Western laws, they use the freedom that these countries afford to be able to push that. Now, a very different thing happens, of course, in India, where, and I just want to go back to also this whole Bhindranwale thing. I mean, Bhindranwale, there are posters of Bhindranwale outside Golden Temple. I mean, I've been there. I mean, it's not something that is terribly shocking, to be honest. I mean,
Because it's become so common. I mean, I think
Right.
the point you made is that before the 80s, that wasn't the case.
Correct. And one could sympathize or something, but the problem is when it becomes an overt call for violence, right? And
Yeah.
when you start again using separatism. But Punjab relatively has been peaceful. Of course, there are people like Amritpal Singh, but they're not the majority. I mean, you don't see Punjabis rising up and saying that they want Khalistan. This is happening more in the international diaspora, and I think that's because of groups that tend to use free speech provided to them in these Western countries as a medium to push their venomous sort of ideologies, right?
I think that's
the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that this is not just global, it is diaspora, it is outside
Correct.
of India.
Correct.
It's outside of India. I do need to take last comments. Ambassador Sinha, one prescriptive advice to the government at this point?
I think we should take Canada to the various forums that exist that we are both members of. For example, there is the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, where Pakistan was grey listed some time back. We should take this evidence and go there and ask for Canada to be grey listed. Or, for example, the Security Council, where sanctions can be imposed on countries. We should take this evidence and start a campaign against Canada. Canada cannot go around pretending to be a holier than thou country where there is freedom of speech when it is actually promoting violence and terrorism. And it must pay the price for that. If these various factions in Canada are so powerful as to be able to blackmail the government, then the government must pay the price that other terrorist governments like Pakistan have paid for the support of terrorism.
Puneet, what would you suggest as next steps?
No, I think words are cheap. They just say we will do this. Their relationship, like I am a student of terrorism, and you just have to set a deterrent. Like this is when you don't set a deterrent, it's not like somebody's pickpocketing and you said, we will do something and I'm very hurt. That person will embolden. And this is what we have seen since Kisan Andolan. They are being emboldened to, more and more outrageous acts. And this, you stop it is basically, this is 101 of policing. You set an effective deterrent. And they are not able to set that. You have to proscribe the WSO, the World Sick Organization, which is all doing this, or degrade the diplomatic relations from High Commissioner level to Charge d'Affaires level. There are so many tools. But they will just give statements and the media will run it and something. They don't know how to work with terrorism. I'm sorry.
Aisha, we've all spoken about Canada. You live and work in the United States of America. Let's talk for 2 minutes about what's happened in San Francisco.
Right. Before I just get to that, I wanted to say that one action that could be taken is, yes, public condemnation. But if the Prime Minister sent out, a message in public or directly spoke to Justin Trudeau, which I think he should do, these are concrete steps. I mean, these days social media has a lot of influence. A couple of strong tweets coming from the government of India directed to the Trudeau government could set things in motion, right? So that's just my thought on what action could be taken. I think expelling diplomats right away is is a little bit harsh. But of course, we've got to see them take steps before anything terrible happens. Before July 8th. And if they don't do that, then that could be a step.
And just for context to our audience, July 8th is when these groups have threatened to hold their rally, which they called a so-called freedom rally. Quickly, Aisha, I've got to give the last word to Terry.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The attack on the consulate in San Francisco is terrifying. It's despicable. It's horrific. I mean, this is an attack on India again. I mean, setting fire to a consulate is almost an act of, they say it's arson, it's vandalism, but thankfully nobody got hurt in this process or because it could have been an act of terrorism. And I think this is not going to again end here. There could be other episodes like this, and one has to be really, really careful about how India proceeds with the United States and the UK. But they have to be very firm that such actions are unacceptable. You cannot target diplomats of any country, India, of course, but you cannot target diplomats. That is crossing the line. It's absolutely unacceptable conduct.
Yeah.
And this is violence, and people could get killed.
Yeah. Terry, you said this could be an inflection point. You've been seeing this for decades. Why might this be an inflection point?
Well, we're about to find out, aren't we? I agree that we should not start recommending that India banish Canadian diplomats. I would advise, wait until we see whether the Liberal government has so many other incidents before. Wait and see what happens. Are they really going to go through with this march to the Toronto Consulate? And are they in the name of this jihad against Indian diplomats? Traditionally, what happens in Canada is that that's a municipal decision. That's for the mayor and the council to give a permit for the march. Wrong. Geneva Convention says this is a federal responsibility. The protection of foreign assets, diplomatic premises, that is a federal responsibility. Now, let's see if the Trudeau government has the guts to say, for the first time, we're not going to have this. We are not going to allow people to rally with this sort of purpose. You cannot paint targets on the backs of any diplomats from any country, and we are going to call upon the Mayor and Council of Toronto to disallow such a rally. Now, that would be actually doing something, not just rhetorical, right? Let's see if they have the guts to do that or anything close to that. And then, I would say, start punishing Canada after Canada does something wrong. Just wait and see. Just wait and see.
So let's wait 2 days, and we'll have you back here to look at what's happened and what hasn't happened. Terry Milewski, Aisha Ray, Ambassador Sinha, Puneet Sahani, thank you. To our audience, thank you for watching. See you soon. Take care. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.